Hey there, it's Kyle Boone, aka Strong Jaw. Welcome to the Ion College Basketball Podcast YouTube channel. Check it out. We got some Ion College Basketball Podcast gear. We need to get Fink hooked up
Yeah, where do
on
you get
that
that?
end. That's I got connections, my friend. I've got connections. It's
Does it come
online.
with the hat, or is the hat like a separate deal?
No, it's separate.
Okay.
Separate. Yeah. Two separate transactions. As you can tell, Fink is with me. So you know today is about to get nerdy. We're going to talk about some NBA draft prospects. And Fink is publishing a multi-part series on 247 Sports this week in the lead up to college basketball season, which is, oh my gosh, it's just a few days away. He is previewing the NBA draft in a way that I think is really creative and smart. He is going conference by conference and highlighting all the top prospects in each conference, sorting them out by lottery projections, by guys who could be first rounders, second rounders, and other guys to watch. So today we are going to talk about the ACC and the Big 12. Really excited about this. There's a ton of really good prospects in both of these conferences, especially in the ACC at the top. A lot of guys who could be in the lottery conversation for 2023. So, Fink, how we doing today? You excited to talk some draft?
Great. Yes, that's all I'm doing all week long. We got seven of these. We're going in alphabetical order. We started Monday was the ACC, Tuesday's Big 12. Wednesday we've got coming out with the Big East and then the Big 10. Reason why the Big 12 is first is because they use the numbers and not the letters. So we're going in order here. Pac-12, SEC, and then non-BCS conferences all on the schedule. So a lot of NBA draft stuff. It's a lot of fun.
I love it. Well, let's get right into it then. Let's go start with the top ACC prospects, and we'll go through the guys who we think can be in the lottery discussion for 2023. Number one on the list is Dariq Whitehead, a guy who's a five-star prospect who signed with Duke coming out of high school. He's from Montverde Academy, was a top 3 overall recruit in the 2022 class. Underwent foot surgery earlier in the preseason, so I think that's maybe the big question here. But a guy who I really, really like, obviously you're really high on. He's 6'6", almost 200 pounds, really explosive athlete. What do you like about Dariq Whitehead? And really, there's several Duke guys on this list if you want to go down and talk about them too.
Yeah, it's so first things first, obviously, Dariq with that fractured foot required surgery at the end of August. That's going to set him back because you really can't. You can't overstate how important the preseason is for a college basketball freshman, and then even the opening weeks of the season. So I do think that the injury changes his potential impact on this year's team. Even when he comes back, I think it's going to be, hard to maybe elevate himself into the same role he might have had if he were here in developing that identity from the very beginning. But I do not think it's necessarily going to have that much impact on his long-term NBA projection, at least assuming that it doesn't become a recurring issue with the foot. Obviously, the lower body and the feet in particular, you have to be careful. But assuming that becomes a non-issue, the thing I've always liked about Whitehead is the fact that he was a high-profile prospect when he was in 8th grade. And usually that is a death trap. I mean, it is an absolute trap in terms of kids who lose all sense of humility and work ethic. But it is a testament to his character that he avoided that trap. And to the contrary, I thought we saw him evolve in a great way in terms of his habits, in terms of his maturity. In fact, by the time he was going into his senior season at Montverde, he was a guy who understood how to impact winning without having to dominate the ball. So you've got a good perimeter size. You've got a multi-positional player. You've got a good athlete, not necessarily a great athlete by NBA standards. A good passer, multi-positional defender. One of the things that's going to be interesting, and I think his maybe his limitations, for lack of a better word, this year are going to play into it, is I don't think Dariq Whitehead is a natural alpha on the offensive end of the floor. He's made strides as a shooter, but he's not a natural shooter. In fact, I thought his senior season at Montverde, you saw him really for the first time almost try and assert himself and get a little frustrated when he wasn't as the primary offensive weapon. To me, the best version of Dariq Whitehead is when he is impacting winning without having to dominate the ball. I'm not sure he's a natural alpha on the offensive end. So the silver lining of this injury is if it gets him to kind of buy back into that role where he can impact winning in a variety of other ways without having to dominate the ball, be the offensive focal point, I still think that is a pathway that gets him into the lottery conversation, of course.
For sure. Yeah, he's a guy who actually, I don't know if you will like or hate this comp. He's a guy who kind of reminds me a little bit of Keldon Johnson coming out of Kentucky. He has got really good size. Not necessarily an alpha, right? But a guy who I think can be a really good kind of off the ball player. If he can improve his 3-point shot, I think he can really add some scoring on that end. And then the defensive versatility, obviously, with the size, I think is going to be a plus for him in the NBA.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I should add, a lot like Keldon, an alpha type of personality. So when I say alpha, I'm not talking about his personality or approach. I'm talking more about a guy who can be a primary orchestrator of a NBA offense in the half.
For sure.
I'm not sure that's what he is.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Next on our list, Dereck Lively II, another Duke guy, a modern day big man, another 5-star who is going to be a freshman at Duke. Really high on him. It's really hard to kind of value big men in the NBA draft. In the modern NBA right now, but Lively seems like he might just be a special type of prospect. We have him as a potential lottery guy. What do you like about him? Just the size and skill combination that he brings to the table for Duke.
Yeah, so I think the eval that we had in high school is still very much valid now, and it's become the talking point for me, for you, for so many others, and that's the modern day big man label. And there's a few different things that go into that. Number one, he's a 7-footer. Number two, he can protect the rim, and he can impact the rim offensively too, because he's a vertical spacer and emphatic finisher. He also runs the floor extremely well. Now, when you talk about the modern big man, you have to be able to step away from the basket on both ends of the floor. Defensively, he's a 7-footer who can move his feet, which means he's got more potential defending pick and roll than most guys his size. Offensively, we saw in the second half of his high school career that he started to develop some 3-point shooting ability. And we think that's projectable, so that at the next level, he's going to be a guy who can not only be that vertical spacer and lob threat, but he can also space the floor with his 3-point shooting. And that's going to open up the court in a variety of different ways. What Dereck Lively has never been, at least to date, is, again, I'm going to go back to this term, the offensive alpha. Even in high school and in the EYBL, he was rarely the guy, although he was clearly the most talented prospect on his Westtown team. He was rarely the guy that they threw it to and said, hey, go get us 30 tonight. He wasn't a guy who had a polished jump hook. He's not somebody who created his own offense. And in today's NBA, you mentioned that there is less emphasis on the center position, or less demand, maybe I should say, on the center position than ever before. And if there is, it is usually around guys who can be advantage creators at that huge size. Lively, I think, is more of a natural complementary piece. I still think he's worthy of that lottery consideration, but as I've heard some of the feedback this year, this fall, I should say, it's very much centered around that. Well, can we get it somewhere else? But I think the other things that you have to talk about when you talk about Lively is that great teammate. Everybody loves being around him. Really smart kid, so he's going to be able to understand different concepts and adapt quickly on both ends of the floor, and really comfortable in his own skin. So this is a guy, is he going to come in and get you 20 and 10 in an NBA game? Maybe not. But I think his floor is really high, because I think he's going to be able to impact winning and contribute in a really important way for a long, long time.
For sure. Yeah. And the last guy we'll mention here among possible lottery prospects, Terquavion Smith from NC State, a really interesting prospect, really athletic. Kind of popped onto the scene late last year. I thought that he may stay in the 2022 NBA draft and maybe would have been a first-round pick, but really interesting guy coming into this year. Kind of plays a herky-jerky style. Is really fun to watch. Good burst. What do you like about him and his prospects entering this season?
Well, to your point, I think he's the best returning prospect in the conference. And I think most people thought he was leaving last year, because he went to the pre-draft combine in Chicago and he played great. And so, you usually go there to see if you can play your way into something. And when you do, you stay. Well, he did play his way into something, and he still said, you know what, I'm going to go back to college.
Yep.
So the thing you like about Terquavion is he's got decent size for a guy who's probably going to play with the ball in his hands, but he really scores it. I mean, he shoots the ball off the dribble. He shoots the ball off the catch. He's got a terrific kind of pull-up game that whether it's from 18 feet or 25 feet, so he's going to be able to play pick and roll. He can slide off the ball and provide floor spacing because he's a spot-up shooting threat as well. He's got to get bigger and stronger. He's very lean right now. That's the kind of the Achilles heel that jumps right out at you. If you do a little bit more of a deep dive, though, you can see like his defensive intensity has got to improve from where it was last year. He's got to prove that he's not going to hurt you on that end of the floor. And then he's got to get better as a finisher too, from an analytical perspective. If you watch the highlight tapes, you'll see him get off his feet. I even tweeted some of these yesterday. Shout out Matt Penny for putting those together last year. But you see him get off his feet and like hammer some big time dunks with dexterity. But when you look at the numbers, you're like, oh, this has got to get better, especially for a kid who really needs to bulk up. I mean, that's where the eye test meets the analytics, where you see someone who needs to add significant muscle and then shoots such a low percentage at the rim. But I do think, as I said, he had a very good chance to be a first round pick last year, came back. The interesting thing is, I think he could be coming back to be more NBA ready. I'm not sure how much his stock is going to go up because could he play his way into the lottery? Sure. But how many kind of, I think if you're looking at like a second unit, instant offense type guy, someone of that, is that prototype usually a lottery pick? Not usually. Doesn't mean it's out of the question. I think he's got a chance to show he can be more than that. But, so I think this year at NC State, he can help ease his transition to the NBA, but it remains to be seen how much it's really going to impact his draft stock, given how high it was last May.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very well put. Really interesting guy to watch. A guy who I think could really rise during this year, but I'm not sure he can fall that much. Feels very safe as like someone who could go in the late lottery or like early 20s. In that range is where I have him projected right now. Let's mention a couple of other ACC prospects, 2 from Duke and 2 from North Carolina. We'll start with Duke. Tyrese Proctor, incoming point guard. He's another highly touted prospect going to Duke. Shocker. And then Kyle Filipowski, 6'11" center, another 5-star. He's going to Duke. What do you make of those 2 guys as they entered their first season in college?
So Filipowski was a top 5 prospect in the country last year. The intel out of Duke, we finished those rankings in May or something like that. And the intel out of Duke over the summer and this fall hasn't been quite as enthusiastic in terms of what NBA scouts are saying. But I think Filipowski has a chance to play his way back up into that lottery conversation because he is, it's interesting. They're listing him at 7 feet this year. He's always called himself 6'11". So he is that 7-footer who is a playmaker. I mean, he can really handle the ball. He can really pass the ball. Those are actually the things he does best. He has developed into someone who can reliably space the floor, but his shooting was actually behind his handling and passing early on. So, and I think Duke needs him to be good in order to maximize their potential. So if he can kind of find his stride and get it going this year, I think he's going to have the opportunity to do it. And you'll see that's why we don't rank prospects this early on because they haven't even played a game yet. So, basically what we're going off of right now is the hearsay of what NBA scouts are kind of whispering after they go through. Tyrese Proctor is just the opposite. He's a guy who wasn't even expected to be at Duke this year, ended up going a year early and has gotten rave reviews. He's got, projects as a big point guard, another one who's got to fill out his frame and get stronger, but terrific feel. You saw some of the highlights. I posted these yesterday too on Twitter of the things he was able to do in their blue-white game, I believe it was called, but you saw the pick and roll playmaking, utilizing his 6'5" frame to see over top of the defense and spray passes all over the court, ability to get to the rim. Again, it's going to be about getting stronger, being a consistent offensive threat. Also thinks it's going to be interesting where you've got Jeremy Roach in there too, because he's the captain, he's the floor general. So how often is Proctor going to have the ball in his hands. That's why, in the article, I said he's a potential lottery candidate, but I also think it's very possible he comes back for his sophomore year, has the ball in his hands, and then, maybe we're talking about somebody who could really rise a year from now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting prospects in the ACC to watch this season, especially with Jeremy Roach coming back. That's the guy who was preseason first team All ACC, I believe. So how Proctor fits in this season, I think, is going to be really interesting. He's a guy who's going to flash in spurts, but whether or not he, kind of breaks out and really develops as a potential lottery pick in 2023, I think is going to be really interesting. Let's mention the two UNC guys, and then we'll jump over to the Big 12. Caleb Love, the microwave scorer from North Carolina, who just went completely nuclear in the NCAA tournament. A guy who was a 5-star, signed with the Tar Heels out of high school. It's taken him a few years to kind of develop, but has really matured physically. Played a little bit more off the ball last season with RJ Davis kind of emerging, and that was really good, I think, for his prospects moving forward. And then Armando Bacot, the guy who's a preseason first team AP All-American, dominated the NCAA tournament along with Caleb Love. Great rebounder, great size, both really productive. Who I think are going to be stars for the preseason #1 Tar Heels.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's for all of the evils of NIL that are often reported, the fact that both of these guys are back in college basketball after the NCAA tournament they have speaks to how NIL has the potential, and not that they came back strictly for NIL, but how NIL has the potential to make the college game even better. Caleb Love is someone who his arc has been fascinating to me. Because when he was a high school senior, he was a big athletic lead guard who would get downhill. He'd make explosive attacking plays. Most people, and myself included, thought he had a one and done type upside. He gets to North Carolina and it just doesn't go well. To his credit, he doesn't enter the portal. He doesn't say, okay, I'm getting out of here. He recommits himself, comes back as a sophomore, and he has a terrific rebound year, if you will. But what was fascinating about it is that rebound was based on the expansion of his skill set. A guy who when he was in high school, I said he had shooting potential. Well, last year he was a tough shot maker, and he turned that potential into, it's still a little streaky, but when he gets hot, boy, does he get hot. And he shoots it off the dribble. He shoots it with range. He can play with the ball in his hands. He can play off the ball. Both things that you mentioned. And again, it's kind of that instant offense type of vibe that in college may be a primary guy, but maybe in the NBA, it's a secondary weapon who opens up the floor for a bigger, more dynamic playmaker. But he's still by NBA standards, he's a little bit of a high risk, high reward proposition. Bacot is exactly what you're going to get from him. I mean, he's big, he plays hard, he's high energy, he is an elite rebounder of the basketball. And the age-old adage is that rebounding translates. The question is if that's still true in the modern NBA for a guy who doesn't space the floor at all. So what you're going to get. You're going to get an interior defender who can move his feet a little bit, guarding pick and rolls, but is mostly a drop coverage guy, a high volume, exceptional rebounder. And offensively, you're probably not going to get those post-ups in the NBA. So it's basically, you're a role threat and you're a potential finisher. He's a role player in the NBA, quite frankly, but he's a big body, high energy guy who can finish possessions on both ends of the floor. So I think there's potentially a niche for him at that next level. But I suspect you might push back on me a little bit with these North Carolina prospects.
Yeah, I think in terms of their draft stock, I would maybe go Bacot over Caleb Love. I don't want to just say like Bacot is definitely the better prospect than Caleb Love, but if that turns out to be true, it would be that surprising to me. I've always been really enamored with Caleb Love's game. And what we saw from him, obviously playing more off the ball next to RJ Davis last season, I think was really impressive. And I think portends well for his NBA draft prospects, but still a little bit of a streaky shooter. He has a lot of moments where it's a no, yes type situation. And it's great in college. And it can be great in the NBA, but I wonder what the upside here is. And if he's, like, is he like a Jordan Clarkson type guy who can be kind of a microwave scorer, but is more of a volume guy? Like, that's kind of what he has been at North Carolina. Meanwhile, Baycott is an exceptional rebounder. I mean, just one of the best rebounding bigs we've had in the last few years in college basketball. And I think there's legitimate questions about whether that translates to the NBA level or not. I tend to think that it will. I think his role in the NBA will be a little bit more safe to project than Caleb Love's, who's maybe a little bit more volatile in terms of his draft stock and what he could be in the NBA. It felt like every time we looked up in the NCAA tournament, Baycott's like Armando Baycott, the first NBA or first college basketball big man in the NCAA tournament to bring down 85 rebounds and score 86 points since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And you're like, oh my gosh, wow, this dude is just breaking records left and right. So, this is a guy
He's a
who's
great college player. Great college player.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of people like to hedge on like great college player, maybe not a great NBA prospect. I think he can be a really good NBA prospect and could end up being a first rounder. A guy that people probably like to sleep on just because he doesn't fit into like this neat box where he's a modern day big man like a Dereck Lively II. Like, just because he doesn't fit into like what we view right now as the modern NBA big man doesn't necessarily mean that he won't have a role in the NBA. So,
even if you don't buy into the upside, the box that he does fit into is the low maintenance, high energy, big body who exactly what you're going to get and you're not going to have to worry about in your locker room. And when you get, when it comes to finalizing rosters, that's got to be a consideration. Real quick, and I don't want to go too deep on this, but I should also mention North Carolina, like Duke, has got other prospects that people are interested in. You mentioned RJ Davis. I think, like, when I look at his shooting numbers, he's a much better shooter than his shooting numbers show. He can be feast or famine like Caleb Love, so it's kind of a matter of who's hot on what night. If he establishes himself as one of the best shooters in college basketball, which I think he's capable of, is that enough to intrigue NBA scouts even at his size? Seth Trimble coming in there at the point guard position, not a shooter at this stage, but strong, competitive defender, distributor. I think he's going to make the game easier for both Caleb Love and RJ Davis, and is someone who we have on our futures list, meaning like, hey, give him a year, but if he starts to be able to make catch and shoot threes, given everything else he does, he's going to be one. And then Pete Nance, the Northwestern grad transfer at 6'11", shot, I think, like 44% from the 3-point line last year, but only made 1.5 threes. If he can continue to shoot with that type of efficiency, but a little more volume, and then simultaneously show he can defend fours in space while he's next to Baycott, I think, despite the fact that he's older, that could intrigue NBA scouts as well.
The UEFA Champions League on Paramount Plus. 9 months of heart-stopping, hold-your-breath exhilaration. That's brilliant! With more magic and more drama. While a former Bavarian nailed the back of the net in Barcelona, an American trades his stars with zebra stripes, and a Norwegian creates sky blue spectacles. Oh, so stream every sweat-soaked second of regulation time, stoppage time, and extra time. Beyond magnificent! This is the best of the best of the best. This is the UEFA Champions League. Stream every match live, exclusively on Paramount Plus.
Let's hop over to the Big 12 now. That was our recap on the ACC prospects. Love to talk about Keyonte George. He is number one on our list. Guys who could be in the lottery in 2023 playing in the Big 12. Keyonte George going to Baylor, microwave scorer. He's a certified bucket getter. Will have a chance, I think, to showcase his kind of dual threat ability. Not only just a scorer, but a guy who I think can be a creator with Baylor this season. I think Adam Flagler is obviously going to have a bigger role distributing and kind of creating for Baylor. I think he will step into the, kind of the lead point guard role. But, I think there's a chance that George could end up being, a really valuable combo guard who really showcases himself as like a clear top 10 prospect in this 2023 class.
Yeah, I think, Flagler and LJ Cryer, that's going to be this year's 3-guard rotation at Baylor. The interesting thing about Baylor's rotation, though, is, guys 6, 7, and 8 off the bench may not be guards. They may come off the bench with, unless you, kind of consider Langston to be a guard, is that, so I think what you're going to see is all three of those guys have an opportunity to play with the ball in their hands. And I think that's one of the question marks for Keyonte George, because he's 6'3", and he's not like super twitchy athletically. Right. So, I think his best upside is as someone who can play with the ball in his hands at the NBA level. And so I think he's going to have a chance to show that at Baylor, but not be on an island with it. So it'll be enough to intrigue some people with his upside, and simultaneously he'll be playing with other ball handlers and other playmakers, and he'll have a lot of space. I was able to see them practice earlier this month, and the other thing I would say is that the biggest concern about Keyonte in high school was his conditioning. Quite frankly, he wasn't in great shape. But that looks to be that looks to have changed, not only by the look of his body, but by the amount of work he's getting. And I spent most of the day there, and he was the first guy in the gym before practice, getting extra shots up. He's in the morning getting extra shots up. So he is really committed to his body, and it shows. And you said it. I mean, he is as polished a scoring guard as there was in the high school class last year. I mean, it was really him and Nick Smith. Those were the two guys that, in terms of like skilled scoring guards who could get their own on three levels, those were the top two.
Yeah, really excited about Keyonte George. I think CBS and 247 have been ahead of market on George, or a little bit higher than market. I mean, we did our Big 12 preseason preview, and he was our preseason Big 12 player of the year. So we have really high expectations for him. There's a lot of talent at Baylor, and I think that may limit some of his ceiling and maybe even some of his production, but I think he has a chance to emerge as one of the alphas there at Baylor. So really intrigued with him. Second lottery prospect we'll mention in the Big 12, Dillon Mitchell from Texas. Chris Beard saw he had a quote recently about Dillon Mitchell, 5-star signee, who basically said, like, Mitchell's a game changer defensively. And I think I'm really intrigued with what he brings on that end. The long wing at 6'7", pretty good athlete, lefty stroke, man after my own heart. Like, just, I love it. Love his game, tons of upside. Really interested to see kind of what he will do this season for Texas, because Texas is very experienced. They're very good. I don't know how big a role he's going to have, but the upside here with Dillon Mitchell, I think, is sky high.
Yeah, so if we were talking about a guy that maybe I'm higher on than most in the long term, it would be Dillon Mitchell. I think when you talk about his role this year, coming into Texas, where you bring a lot of guys back, you're also, adding immediate impact transfers, to say the least. They're not going to need him to be the man offensively, and he's not really prepared to do that either. What he is one of the most explosive and complete athletes in the class. So the leaping ability, listen, everybody can see that. We don't need to harp on that, but it's freakish. I mean, it's as good as it gets. But he's not just a leaper. He runs the floor really well. He moves his feet laterally. And when you start to look at what is being prioritized in the modern NBA in terms of guys who, everybody talks about being multi-positional and being able to scramble, but being multi-positional, being able to switch. But when you really dig a little deeper, it's like guys who can scramble, who can get out and kind of cover corner to corner. You said he was 6'7". I think that's going to be fascinating. Is he 6'7"? Is he 6'8"? There were some people were listing him at 6'9". He got measured at 6'9" last spring. Like, that's a big part of, how intriguing he's going to be, because offensively he does have to make some strides. He's a finisher, and that's, the most consistent part of his game. He's got some shooting touch, but it's really inconsistent. It's certainly something he has to develop. Started to show some signs last year, but he's not ready to consistently make open threes yet. He's not a playmaker. He's a finisher. The other thing that I think is relevant about Dillon Mitchell is he is a high energy guy. In my mind, he was arguably the most consistently productive player on Montverd's team last year, and that was a team that also included Dariq Whitehead and Jalen Hood-Schifino.
Yeah, and that's high praise. So I have not been quite as high on Dillon Mitchell, but the fact that you're high on him, the fact that I think you're kind of describing his upside long term, starting to come around on him. Really
It's a
excited.
swing. He's not a say.
Yeah.
It's a swing. I mean, I think you'll see some people who could have him as high as 5. I think you could see some people when they start putting guys in order. I think you could see some people that have him between 15 and 20, because it is a swing.
Yep. But for those who are listening, we're talking nerdy here, and when Fink talks about someone the way that he just talked about Dillon Mitchell, let the ears perk up a little bit, because I think that's something to watch over the next few months for sure. A couple other Big 12 prospects that we want to highlight here. Jalen Bridges, West Virginia transfer, who's now at Baylor. This feels just like a perfect situation for him with the Bears. Scott Drew just has a knack for recruiting and developing guys like this. Historically, he's a pretty good shooter. Curious to see how he's going to fit in this season, but you were able to see Baylor practice. Did you get a chance to see Jalen?
Yeah. So here's what happened. Yeah. They took that foreign tour to Canada, and both Flagler and Cryer were out of the lineup. So Keyonte George goes and gets you 30 every night. And Jalen Bridges had played really, really well. And then he jumped up draft boards. So when I went to go watch Baylor practice, he was good, but wasn't quite as good as he was in Canada, because that's not going to be his role. But when you're playing with that 3-guard lineup and you're going to be a stretch 4, and here's the reality: every kid wants to be told they're a big 3, and they want to be told they're a wing. Jalen Bridges' NBA stock is going to go up because he's going to be utilized as a stretch 4, and that's going to give him extra space and extra time to kind of show that shooting and see if the analytics will bear that out. It's West Virginia is a program that prides itself on defense and rebounding, not necessarily on floor spacing. So this, offensively at least, is going to be a better situation for Bridges. And the other thing it's going to do is it's going to force him to rebound the ball. At West Virginia, everybody is going to get that thing. At Baylor, he better go get it, because it's him, a 5-man, and then three guards who aren't any bigger than 6'3". So I think analytically and aesthetically, he's going to look very good this year. But as I said, I think a lot of it is situational. He's a good prospect. He's in a situation to really showcase himself this year, but it still remains to be seen if he's going to be quite as good as it looked over the summer in that foreign tour.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. Then one last guy that we will mention here among Big 12 prospects to watch, another freshman, 5-star recruit, Grady Dick. Folks around KU who I talked to seem to think that Dick can be like one of the best shooters that Bill Self has ever had. Really interested to see where he stacks up this season, because again, another team that I think is going to have a lot of experience. I think they have a lot of proven commodities on this team, but his shooting ability, I think is really intriguing. I'm not exactly sure where to slot him in my 2023 ranks. I kind of want to see it first to see what type of shooter we're seeing and what type of shooter we're talking about. But I think clearly a guy who could be on the first round radar. And if he's just like an exceptional shooter who really proves himself on a good Kansas team, then yeah, this is a guy who I think can really rise up draft boards.
Yeah. So to your point, I think there's a wide variety of possible outcomes here. I mean,
sure.
6'7" wing means he's got good positional size, means he can really shoot it. We know he can really shoot it. If all goes well, is it impossible to say he gets into the lottery this year? No, it's not impossible. But everything's got to go nearly perfectly. And it's also not impossible that he says, hey, you know what? I've got to come back for my sophomore year. That's not impossible at all. Making shots in high school is vastly different than making shots in college. And Grady Dick can make threes. He can make pull-ups. What he doesn't do especially well just yet is figure out how to get himself easy buckets. So in terms of getting himself to a layup or a free throw to get him going, that's something that isn't really a big part of his arsenal right now. So when he has less time to react and get his shot off, and it's more physical and it's quicker, does that become a factor? How well does he defend his position? And to that initial point, can he diversify that offensive game at all? All those things, if they all go right, then maybe we're talking about him in the same conversation as Dillon Mitchell and Keyonte George. But there's a lot of variables that have to go right. So I think there's, at least in year one, there's a wider range of potential outcomes relative to his draft status. But again, big wing who shoots it, Floor spacing is at a premium in today's NBA. He's another guy who can shoot the ball off the dribble. He's also super high character, known to be able to process the game quickly on both ends of the floor. So checks a lot of boxes. I think he's an NBA player. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I love it. A lot of prospects to watch in the Big 12 this season. A lot of prospects to watch in the ACC this season. We will be back later, probably this week, to finish out the rest of Fink's series. That's going to do it for today's show. Please subscribe to the Ion College Basketball Podcast YouTube channel. Go subscribe to the Spotify channel or iTunes channel, wherever you get your podcast. And also, please check out Fink's stories. He is grinding so hard every single day on these, trying to give you the best preview content for the NBA draft this upcoming season. He's already got the ACC published today. The Big 12 is publishing today as well. He will be publishing those every single day this week in the lead up to the start of college basketball season. So go check that out at 247sports.com. Fink, thank you so much for your time. We will see you later this week.